So my name is Joanne Thiessen Martens. I'm a PhD student at the University of Manitoba, working on organic cropping systems and phosphorus dynamics in them, related to the use of struvite as a phosphorus source. So I'll talk more about that in a moment. But some of you know me from past years, but for those who don't, I used to work in Martin Ence's program as a technician and research associate for a bunch of years. So through that work, I saw the phosphorus issues that so many organic farmers were struggling with. And all along, there was a few of us. Martin Ence was kind of the one that probably planted this idea in my mind. But he's like, one of the flaws of organic farming systems is that there is no way to actually create a phosphorus cycle. There's no way to bring the nutrients from the soil through the food chain to humans back into the agricultural system. And that's mostly what happens in conventional farming too. It's not like we're recycling all those nutrients either, but at least in conventional, they can put biosolids back onto land. It doesn't happen a ton, but it can happen. In organic, there's many good reasons why we don't want to put biosolids from municipal waste onto organic land because of all the different contaminants in there. And so when I heard about struvite, that it's a mineral that's extracted from municipal wastewater. It happens through just a chemical reaction, I guess, a precipitation or crystallization reaction, and it forms this mineral in a very pure form, and it takes very, very little of the other contaminants with it because it just forms its little molecule and these crystals, and you can separate that out from all the rest of the stuff that's in there. So it's like, that has promise. And sure enough, I was soon hearing about how they were proposing that this would be an excellent phosphorus source for organic production. It's not permitted in organic production to this point. In Europe, it's provisionally permitted once they would actually go through some other steps with their general fertilizer regulations. And in Canada, with the new regulation that's just coming in now, you could use struvite from animal sources, but not from human sources. So there's some steps in that direction to be able to recycle phosphorus from waste products back into agricultural systems. So I don't think so. I mean, it may exist, but I don't think that would be a economically viable or useful way to get phosphorus from plant sources into a fertilizer. We don't have the same contamination issues with plant sources, so why go to that trouble of separating it from the other stuff that's around it? So struvite is, so we're testing struvite for its agronomic potential. So does it work? And so might you wonder, why do we have to test a fertilizer? Surely a fertilizer will work. Well, struvite's a little different than most conventional phosphorus fertilizers in that it's not really soluble in water. And plants don't have teeth, they have to drink their nutrients, so their nutrients need to be soluble in water. And so that's what we're really looking at. Because there's a bunch of research from Europe that's shown, it's not really soluble in water, and yet the plants still seem to be able to get at it. And so the thought is that the plants are releasing substances from their roots that may be acidic. They may just help generally with the phosphorus, like releasing phosphorus or preventing phosphorus from getting kind of stuck in the soil in various different ways to make that phosphorus more available to the plants. And so that's kind of what we're exploring some more here, is exactly how the plants get at the phosphorus that is in the struvite. In some of my past work, we have shown at a very low phosphorus site under organic management with high pH, so it's the kind of conditions where struvite is at least soluble. It really shouldn't be soluble at all, and yet it still works really well in alfalfa. It works reasonably well in wheat, but it doesn't work in flax. And so we see there are some differences between different crop species in terms of their ability to use the phosphorus that is in struvite. And so it got me thinking about, if we do see this range of differences, well, flax we don't really need to worry about. It's good at getting phosphorus in other ways. So that's another topic, but I won't talk about that more. Whereas something like wheat, it does reasonably well at getting phosphorus out of the soil, but if it's not that great at using the struvite, maybe there's ways that we can use other crops that are actually really good at using struvite to kind of pre-process that struvite, bring it into the biologically available pool, and essentially feed it to the wheat. So there's a few crops that I'm looking at. I've got peas, and I've got faba beans, and I've got buckwheat. And the reason I chose those three crops are for different reasons for each crop. So peas are known to produce citrate or citric acid, which is one of those organic acids that is thought to help release the phosphorus out of the struvite to dissolve it, and so the plant can use it. Faba beans don't seem to do that as much, but they seem to somehow be really good at whatever phosphorus they get at passing it along to another crop that's grown either with it in an intercrop or that's grown after it. And there's been a bunch of work in Australia. They're not really sure why that happens, whether it's just because it grows big and it has a high phosphorus concentration, it has lots of roots, so it finds a lot. But anyway, so I thought I'd include that one because it seems promising in its ability to actually kind of pass that along. And then the other one I have is buckwheat, and buckwheat, of course, has a reputation for being really good at scavenging phosphorus, and crops seem to do well when grown after buckwheat in lower phosphorus soils. And there is one paper that's out there that showed that buckwheat responded a lot better to struvite than wheat did. And it did just as well with struvite and a soluble phosphorus fertilizer, whereas the wheat did a lot more poorly with the struvite than it did with the soluble fertilizer. But that one was done in a greenhouse, in a pot study, controlled conditions. No one that I'm aware of has tested these in the field. So I thought, well, there's a good challenge for you, for me. And but beyond just seeing how these crops do, we want to understand why. So that's actually what Kathan, my summer student, and I are doing here today. We're digging up plants. We're essentially separating the roots from the soil. There's just a tiny bit of soil that sticks to the roots. It's called the rhizosphere soil. It's that, you can barely see it. We collect it in a little container of a trap solution. We measure the pH of that solution. We take tiny little samples of it and filter it through this, it's a 0.2 micron filter. So we're filtering out everything except what's dissolved. And then later on, we're going to analyze those to see which compounds, which organic acids are in that rhizosphere extract that was right around the roots. So I have no data yet because we're just starting on this project, but that's what all of our setup there is to do. I have a pH meter set up in the back of my car, and you know, it's kind of fun. It's like outdoor lab. So what we've seen here, behind me on my right, your left, are the peas. In the middle here is the buckwheat, and then there's faba beans down at the end. And there's 7 plots of each. One has struvite, and one has monoammonium phosphate, which is just your regular 1152 fertilizer. Dan was kind enough to take this little chunk of land out of certification for a few years so that we can examine this on land that has an organic history, which is really generous. We don't have a lot of differences showing up here because this field actually has a little more background phosphorus than we were expecting. It's around 15, 17 parts per million phosphorus, which is actually great. It's a great level for crop production. Yeah, we thought everything from the field history and everything would have suggested that it should have been really low. So not quite sure what's happening there, but that's what we've got. And so you learn things from those sites too. But, you know, I've put signs, they're down in the grass along the front of here. So you can, if you want to walk along there afterwards and see if you can pick out any differences between the ones with struvite and the ones with MAP, that kind of thing. I don't see a lot so far. But what we have another site at Lebo, Manitoba, which is that site I was talking about before, really low phosphorus, like 2 or 3 parts per million, which any conventional farmer would be like having a heart attack if they saw their phosphorus was down to that level. Many organic farmers exist with that and do their best using crops that like flax that do well in lower phosphorus conditions and that associate with the fungi in the soil and that kind of thing. But yeah, so I brought a few plants from Lebo just to show you the kinds of differences that we're seeing. So this is the buckwheat from Lebo. On the left is the control that's had nothing added. In the middle is the struvite, and the right side is the monoammonium phosphate, the conventional fertilizer. So you can see that control buckwheat is really suffering. That buckwheat, so I dug that up yesterday, it's actually 2 weeks older than this. So mind you, it was cold then, there wasn't as much heat, but still, it should be bigger than this buckwheat that we have here. The struvite and the MAP are looking very similar. So that's really promising to see how the buckwheat is responding to those phosphorus sources, indicating that to the buckwheat, it doesn't matter that soil is high pH. It has the ability to get at that phosphorus that's in the struvite, and we'll learn more about exactly how it's doing that in a minute. Do you want to go to the next one? Yeah. Peas. Again, control struvite MAP from left to right. There we're seeing very little differences. These are single plants. In the plots, it's maybe a little bit, you can see a little bit more of a difference between the unfertilized and the fertilized, but it is not nearly so dramatic as the buckwheat. And then the next one, the faba beans.
How much 11?
So it's 30 kilograms per hectare of actual phosphorus. So it ends up being like 65 or so kilograms per hectare of P2O5, 60 pounds per acre, 60-ish. So the faba beans, you know, there seems to be a little bit of a thing going on there where the control is smaller than the other ones. It's maybe a bit of a, you know, the struvite's kind of in between the others. So, but the control is kind of nothing. And so we've done nothing. Yeah, we didn't add anything. So, what was I going to say about that? Yeah, so we are seeing that these crops do respond differently. And so my question is buckwheat actually good at getting phosphorus out of the soil? Or is it good at getting phosphorus, getting stuff out of a fertilizer? And to me, it looks like it's not that good at getting it out of the soil. The peas and the faba beans are doing better compared to in the control where nothing was added. The peas and the faba beans are doing better than the buckwheat. But when you add a little bit of some kind of phosphorus amendment, then the buckwheat really shines. So it's just, yeah, some clues into how these different crops interact with the soil environment, with things that are, with amendments that are added. But yeah, it raises a lot of questions about, you know, how we can make the most efficient use of a phosphorus source. Buckwheat, it seems like we want to feed something to it directly. It's not maybe going to do as well at just scavenging what's out there. And so if you're on a really phosphorus deficient field and you don't have access to any amendments to add, perhaps buckwheat isn't going to be the wonder crop that it might be in a place that has just a little more phosphorus available that it can take it up. So now, thanks, Kay, then you can put them down if you want to, else they'll end up in the field over there. So the next step of that, though, is we not only have to get the struvite phosphorus into this cover crop or green manure, we have to get it into the wheat crop. And there's a few things that have to happen for that to actually occur. One is that there has to be enough total phosphorus in that plant material to make a difference. So you need a pretty good amount of biomass production. But there also needs to be, I'll put it this way, enough phosphorus per bite, like for a microbial bite of plant material. So like the proportion of phosphorus, the concentration of phosphorus in that plant material needs to be high enough. If there's only a little bit of phosphorus and quite a bit of carbon and nitrogen and other things, the microbes will just take that phosphorus and use it for themselves. And eventually when they die, it'll get released, but in the short term, it'll just get locked up. So you need a fairly high phosphorus concentration to actually have some left over when that plant material decomposes to become available to a crop that's growing next year. And there, according to what other people have read, or have done, the research that I've read, buckwheat does seem to be good at that. If there's phosphorus around in the soil, it'll just keep taking it up. It'll suck it up. It's greedy and what's called luxury uptake. So it'll accumulate really high concentrations of phosphorus in its leaves, stems, whatever. And so in that way, it has good potential to pass that along to the other crop. But then, some of the other studies are showing that faba bean does that really well as well. So who really knows exactly what's happening there? But those are some of the steps that need to happen. In short, so if you are interested in increasing your phosphorus availability to a crop by growing a cover crop or a green manure, you have to make sure that that cover crop has access to phosphorus. Because if it's just a small little plant and with a low phosphorus concentration, it really won't do anything for you. So increasing phosphorus availability biologically is a great idea, but plants, microbes, and everything, they need something to work with. They need some kind of phosphorus, whether it's naturally occurring in a soil or it's added in some kind of amendment. Yeah. What else? Any questions?
What's the pH level
at Lebo? It's around 8.1. Yeah, very similar. I think yours came back right around there too, or 8.2 or something. Yeah. Yeah, and those are the really challenging conditions for phosphorus, not just in organic farms, conventional farms too. Around 8 is where phosphorus is its least soluble in the soil. If you go to really high pH soils, it becomes more available when you have other issues. But around 6.5 or so is probably where it's most available in soils. So these high pH soils that we have in Manitoba are really challenging for phosphorus management. As a conventional farmer, you can put on loads of phosphorus fertilizer and it'll largely get locked up with calcium in your soil if you have a high pH. And then it just sits there and it's not gone. It's not going to disappear like nitrogen does, but it doesn't help your crop. So that's where these crops that are actually good at sort of mining the phosphorus out of the soil are gaining a lot of interest in those types of situations too, where you have maybe added a bunch of phosphorus in the past, but it's locked up there. So you have a high total phosphorus in the soil, kind of a medium solubility. It maybe doesn't show up on a soil test, but it's kind of ready to dissolve. And then you can sometimes use some of these crops that are like the faba bean, the peas, buckwheat that have some ability to dissolve that phosphorus and take it up. Most of the work, there has been work looking at that, and it is less energy intense than some of the other ones. Most of that work looking at the life cycle and from an energy and environmental standpoint has been done in Europe, so they have to recycle their phosphorus. They have really strict guidelines on how much can go out into their wastewater. And they also are really keen to become phosphorus independent and not have to import phosphorus from outside the EU. And so they're looking at every recycling possibility that they can. So there's all kinds of things. They're incinerating sewage sludge and recycle from the ash, and they're trying all kinds of different things. So the struvite, I think, in terms of energy, comes out. It wasn't the best, but it was one of the better ones. And especially in terms of the usefulness of the end product then. Some of the other ones, got more phosphorus out with less energy, but then the end product wasn't really useful as a fertilizer. It wasn't available to plants. So yeah, so struvite, of all the kind of recovered phosphorus products that they're looking at in Europe, it's the one that's really getting the most attention in terms of its apparent economic and agronomic viability. I don't know of any. That doesn't mean they don't exist, but I don't know of any. I heard some rumors that there is an outfit in BC or something that was going to be producing that. And I've heard rumors that Austera, the company that produces this crystal green, the municipal stuff, is looking into livestock streams as well. But as far as I'm aware, there's nothing commercially available from like in terms of livestock struvite. I think so, because as soon as Europe makes the change to their fertilizer regulation that says struvite is not sewage sludge, it's a byproduct, which apparently is in the works kind of now. As soon as that goes ahead, it's going to be allowed in organic production in Europe. And then I think the rest of the world will follow. And the more organic farmers insist that they need a phosphorus product that is effective in high pH soils, I think the more inclined the standards people will be to say, okay, yeah, this is worth looking at. Yeah, probably. Yeah, I don't expect they would make changes kind of mid-review, Yeah, that's possible. Yeah. Yeah, organic farmers are in a tough spot right now in terms of phosphorus sources, because most phosphorus amendments are either not very available, as in there's not enough of it around, not bioavailable, as in you could, like rock phosphate, you can throw it on, but it's basically just adding rock to your soil. There's already a whole pile of insoluble phosphorus in your soil, and adding rock phosphate in the long term, yes, it kind of can provide a source, but it's not going to do much of anything in the short term. Or you get product like there's bone meal products and those kinds of other products, which are also not that bioavailable under high pH conditions. So it's a real challenge. And so a lot of times organic farmers are stuck just trying to work with what they've got, small amounts of manure. And mustard is another one that I considered including, because it's mustard, canola, that whole family, they're also, they acidify their rhizosphere, similar to some of these others. I thought I would focus on the ones that are either currently used as green manures in Manitoba, or that have actually been shown, like the buckwheat, to do better with struvite than some other crops. There's a lot of speculation out there about, legumes in general seem to do well with struvite. Well, you base that on a study with red clover. So like, is it just red clover, or is it all legumes? We do know that legumes do acidify their rhizosphere as well. And the nitrogen fixation process actually helps with that. So that's a pretty neat interaction. The legumes need the phosphorus so that they can fix nitrogen. And then in the process of fixing the nitrogen, they actually acidify their rhizosphere and make more phosphorus available. So kind of cool. Well, and what we have seen is as your soil phosphorus drops off, your wild mustard, pigweed, those kinds of things drop off too, because wild mustard, I think pigweed also is not mycorrhizal, so it doesn't, they have a acidification mechanism, but they don't have the association with the fungus. So when phosphorus gets really low, then even the acidification doesn't really help them that much, and they just don't thrive. We've seen that in my past struvite experiments at Lebo, where you could tell where the struvite had been applied in the flax, not because there was any change in the flax, but because the wild mustard was blooming. Like you could see rectangles of wild mustard blooming like crazy. So yeah, no, there's a million questions that could be asked about this still, but we'll hope to answer a few. It is. I actually have some in my car. I forgot I was going to bring that over here. This is stuff, so it comes from the company Austera. This is the stuff that they provided to us a few years ago. It's kind of a jagged granule. It's not a nice smooth prill, so it doesn't flow quite as well as most fertilizers, but decently well. And some of their other sizes and products, I think, are a more rounded granule. But yeah, and that's just what it looks like when it forms. It's not like they did anything to make it white, or it's just a white crystal. It would be about 5% nitrogen, because struvite is magnesium, ammonium, and phosphorus, and then with some water molecules kind of attached to it. So yeah, it's 5% nitrogen. 28% P2O5, so 12% actual phosphorus, and then 10% magnesium, and then the rest is like hydrogens and waters and stuff like that. Price-wise, it depends. Well, the price of compost manure varies so much, right? So it depends how far you're moving it. If you're getting it from your neighbor who just wants to get rid of it, then compost or then manure is going to be cheaper. This product is, according to some people that I've talked to, about double the price of regular 1152 fertilizer per ton of product, which means it's about 4 times the price in terms of actual phosphorus. That's still quite a bit less than any of the organic amendments that I know of, and probably less than bringing in manure from a distance. And in terms of efficacy, we haven't really compared directly. Manure, of course, has all kinds of other good things in it. Like there's sulfur, there's nitrogen, potassium, which you're not getting so much here. So in terms of a well-rounded plant food, manure is always better. But if you have a specific phosphorus issue, and you don't need to be building up your sulfur and your, all your other nutrients, then struvite may be more effective. It's certainly easier to handle as well. You can just put it into the seed row. No, that's right. You just put it in your seed row. It doesn't burn the seed like conventional fertilizers do because it isn't soluble. It doesn't have that salt index, and so you don't get those toxicity effects that you would with some other phosphorus fertilizers. That's why conventional canola farmers really like this. So they're paying 4 times, not all, some of them are paying 4 times the amount for struvite because they can just put it in the row. Canola has high phosphorus requirements, but is also really sensitive to the salts stress of putting fertilizer in the row. So it's worth it to them to use this. So I think that's really interesting that there's this is not just a niche thing. This is a worldwide movement looking at using struvite as a phosphorus source and a way to close that global phosphorus cycle. So instead of mining phosphate rock to make into fertilizer, even organically approved fertilizers, it's still a non-renewable resource. We're treating it like a disposable item, right? Like our our plastic cups. So if we're just mining it, putting it on, growing one crop, and then if our own waste is just going into the lake. So any efforts to close that loop are really valuable. It's the only one I know of. Yeah. There may be others, but I don't know of them. So yeah. Yeah, and Austera is so Saskatoon, Edmonton, they have Austera functioning there, so they're capturing their phosphorus out of their municipal waste and making it into fertilizer. Portage la Prairie is, I think, they have a pilot plant there. Winnipeg, of course, has its head in the sand and is just sending it to either the lake or the landfill, where, of course, it does no good to anyone and even harm when it's in the lake. So, if it was coming from food processing waste, then that would be allowed. Yeah. And they have done some of that in Europe too.
Well, then that would be plant.
And so that would be a plant, yeah, that's an example of a plant-based source. Yeah, so that's true. In some cases, yeah, sometimes those industrial processes, they have to be efficient for various reasons, right? And they get very good at what they do. And I know from my experience with, my family butchers our own beef and pork. We are not efficient at that. We get good meat at the end of it, but it takes us probably 5 times as long as an expert to do it. The experts in many cases will do a better job, a more efficient job of many things. Not to say that efficiency is always the most important thing, but in terms of collecting a pure product where quality, the purity of it matters, then sometimes those industrial processes can do a better job.